Welcome to this month's Challenge Hour. I am joined by Leigh and Steph from Accentua. Hello, ladies. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Kim. How are you?
I'm very good. So while we're waiting for everybody to join, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, or you can come on camera. Absolutely fine. While we're just giving everybody a minute or two, would you like to introduce yourselves to our audience today?
Absolutely. Shall I start, Steph, just to set
Yeah,
the tone?
you
So,
take the floor.
okay. So, good afternoon. Mariam, I think you've joined us at the moment, and hopefully others will be as the call progresses. So, Kim, thanks for asking us to take part today. My name is Leigh, obviously from Accentua Group. We are a translation localization organisation based within the UK and the Netherlands. So we have a UK limited and a BV limited. And simply what we're about is effecting good communication. So we are focused and about supporting factually correct, contextually correct, emotively correct translation of the written word for, in this case, in the UK, in the conversation here, predominantly L&D type content, making sure that we deliver content that's directly on point to the intended audience, subject to level that they're in within their organisation, to their cultural demographics, and cultural nuances that impact that significantly, and ensuring the intention of the text that's been created is delivered with the correct integrity. So that's what we try and achieve in the translation and support that we do. And along the way, we have great pairs of hands like Steph, who's our UK project director, and Steph, I'm sure, will introduce herself in a minute, who make sure that we manage that process from an end-to-end perspective to support our end client, and in some cases, their clients. So that's very, very top line of who we do. Perhaps, Steph, you could say a quick hi.
Hi everyone, my name is Steph, and as Leigh said, I am project director at Accenture. I have to say this is a fairly new role for me. I have been a project manager previously. Nothing really much has changed yet, but I am moving into a different role, or slightly different role, but still very much involved in everything, excuse me, everything that relates to translation, really. So I'm kind of the go-between between the client and the supplier. So any translation needs people have, they come to me and I'll make it happen. Basically, that's in a nutshell, obviously. And I've been with Accenture for almost 12 years now, I think.
Yeah.
Have been working in the translation industry since 2008. So I think I know pretty much all the ins and outs. I've seen everything, I think. But with AI constantly, obviously that's now a big factor as well. So new things are coming our way, and we're also learning every day. So it's actually a really nice challenge for us as well to kind of navigate along with our clients and our suppliers to navigate the AI world of translation. So that's good. Yeah.
Interesting times.
Very interesting times. Yes.
Thank you. I mean, from my perspective, I suppose AI has been a complete and utter pain in one sense. Because I imagine, like for me, if I was doing a quick translation on something, then I might Google it, or I might think, oh, let's put it into ChatGPT. But if you're doing a small sentence, that's one thing. But I suppose for people like training providers, they might think, oh, well, I'll just do the entire course in GPT and take what it spits out. How much of a risk would you say that is?
I think
You
it
want to
very
go
much
first, Steph?
yeah, I think it very much depends on the nature of the text. If it's a very straightforward, I don't know, one-page document of, I don't know, a conversation between two people, then if it's just for context, that's perfectly fine. But obviously, if it's a pharmaceutical or medical text, we usually don't recommend using ChatGPT or DeepL or Google Translate. But that also, if it's just to get context, that may suffice. If it's an official publication, for example, or then obviously someone will have to check that. And so it's very specific to the subject, I would say. And in those cases, clients come to us and ask them, so we advise them honestly, because obviously we can offer anything. We do AI translations as well. We have several specific options for that, but we also have human translation. So if something is really only suitable for human translation, we will tell our clients that. And if they still decide to go with AI option, that's fine. But we always try to be as honest as possible. But AI is very, very tricky, very useful tool, but there's also a lot of pitfalls, I think, that people need to be aware of, particularly in translation. It's not a magical solution, whereas I think a lot of people do think that that's the case.
Think in context of some of the projects that we've seen, and I think Steph's response is a very sensible one to what's going on in the market. AI is here to stay, and it's about learning to work with rather than against, because it's about budget management and response time. And there's lots of benefits to it, but with massive caveats around, as said Steph, is about it being subject matter relevant. It suits certain topics and content more than others, certain types of documents more than others. And if it's anything that's got to deliver emotion and context, so like marketing material or training material where it is more emotive, typically it doesn't work very well in our experience because it doesn't convey that. So I think Mariam came up with a question, what's better, sort of Google or what other AI products? Personally, I wouldn't use Google in terms of any translation. I mean, if you look at Word, they've got translation embedded, it's in Teams and all sorts of other things. I think to throw your question back, it really depends on your target audience, the topic that you are looking to deliver content for, the nature, the delivery style as well. What type of delivery is being used? Is it voiceover? Is it using PowerPoint? Is it using video? So there's a lot of things that could be involved in that conversation, and that's where we'd step in and say, talk us through it, and we'd give you the best advice that we could based on the parameters of the contract or the project that you're working in.
Yeah. But in terms of, if I can add to that, in terms of, and to also ask, to answer maybe Mariam's question as well, if you do want to use an open source tool, such as Google Translate, then probably DeepL is better because it gets added to it. Google is there's not a lot of context in Google. And DeepL is slightly better because you can add a couple of filters as well. So then you kind of steer it in a direction that you may want the text to go. You can feed it some information. There's a couple of other tools as well, but I think, Leigh, from experience, some of our clients are also they're mostly using DeepL. I think that's one of the tools, open source tools, that is most widely used. Yeah,
it's been heavily invested in, hasn't it? I think it's on about its 7th round of private capital investment as well as a product and a tool, but it still has its limitations, and I think that's the key point. And I think if it's something that, from my perspective, if a client is invested in commissioning someone to design an L&D program for a project that has to have impact on development of an organization or the global launch of a product or inclusivity for team members, I think even if AI is used, the critical point is that there is a linguist and a person involved in that process to review the content to make sure that it's fit for purpose. As we were just mentioning before we came on, Kim, one of the pharmaceutical pieces that we saw took the word lead, as in a clinical lead, completely out of context and used it as point of lead, as in the metal material. So in that context, completely changed the whole directive of that piece of communication and misinformed effectively, it could be quite dangerous, particularly in pharmaceutical. And I think there's a project we're quoting at which we can't refer to at the moment, Steph, but there's a large project for a pharmaceutical company that we've been asked to quote on. And we've gone through that process with them because we were asked to look at AI. And then on seeing the project, we've gone back and said, actually, we'd be really worried in this instance that it would be wholly inappropriate and detrimental to what you were trying to do, and would strongly recommend you use full human translation on this basis. So that's where we can look at it, have a look at the content, have a look at the project, and give you best advice, really.
I think using the right tool for the right translation is really key there, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, I had my first contract, my first freelance contract was creating GDPR training material. So very technical, very full of jargon, legislation, all of that jazz. And I needed to get it translated into 5 different languages because it was a global company. And they wouldn't pay to bring in external translation services. They were just like, we'll get each different site to translate it. But Spain wouldn't. They didn't have time. So I used Google Translate for this entire, and this was a 45-minute course, right? It was a beast. And then I sent it to them and they said that this doesn't make sense. I'm like, exactly. Now will you please translate it for me? So yeah, I've used Google Translate for that. Never again, and I wouldn't do that again.
I think DeepL is good in terms of what I would call repetitive content. So if you were producing a contract that had the same terms on a regular basis, or basically any repeat, maybe terms and conditions, or manufacturing guidelines that are, packing, famous IKEA packing stuff, all the instructions there, things like that. I think it's repeat, and therefore it's much safer. It's when you put it into different contexts, it becomes more of a challenge. And actually your point about actually even going to the client and getting them to review opens up a whole other bag of worms, Kim, because it becomes more emotive, because someone typically from a UK perspective has written the content, and then it's going out to the different countries who will have a different slant on that content. And we have seen numerous bounces, changes in content, very emotive comments around it, or the reviewing team don't really have the time to do it, and then it's not reviewed correctly, and then issues are then picked up latterly. So even then, it can be a false sense of economy for people to review in-house, if that's not really what they're focused on doing. So it's a real mixed bag. It really depends on the culture within the organisation and the support that the organisation is willing to give in country, and a mandate around it in terms of very tight guidelines of how it's reviewed.
Yeah, I think you'd have to say this is the alpha version of content. If it's going to be translated into 2 languages, 5 languages, 10, whatever, this is what we're going with. Everybody is happy with it. Once it's translated, you are basically fact checking that it makes sense along with the alpha document.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, culturally, if someone changes a word and context, it can change the integrity of the sentence and the integrity of the meaning. So really has to be within sort of quite tight guidelines if people are going to do that internally.
Yeah. So we've got another question in. So industry-based terms, how do you go about it? So this is really interesting. So, because you'll be dabbling in a lot of different industries. So the ones that you deal with, like pharmaceutical, if you're dealt with multiple contracts, then the terminology will be like, oh yeah, I know what this means. But how do you go about dealing with ones that are completely new?
As I said, if it's a specific industry, there are generic terms in an industry that would be used. But typically, on a client perspective, most clients, even within that, have their own specific glossary of terms. And we would work with the client to secure that glossary of terms to make sure that's what we're replicating. And then we would be briefing the translators, if it's human translation, to then make sure that's the profile they work to and include that within the translation. So I know at the moment, Steph, we're waiting for one project back, aren't we, for a very large global carrier logistics company, where we had one project where they didn't give us the glossary, which we'd asked for. And actually, there's another project in hand at the moment. We've said, actually, caused you so many issues last time because you didn't have your glossary prepared. There's no point in us starting this translation until we have your glossary. So you have your baseline industry terms, and then there's always the layer of the particular company and their slant on that. So that glossary of terms is really important to get factored in.
Yeah. And on most projects, we do ask the client if there is any specific terminology they'd like us to use, so then we can make sure that that's incorporated. And that applies to both human translation, because obviously in addition to any glossaries, we always use expert linguists as well who have expertise in that particular subject matter, because a technical translator is probably not very suitable to translate any legal text and vice versa. So we always use experts in the subject matter. With AI, obviously, that doesn't really apply, but what we can do is add glossaries to the tools that we use so that we make sure that that's also incorporated. And we have something called human in the loop. So we have it reviewed by, say, a human person. So the AI output is checked by a human reviser or reviewer who also has access to any client-specific terminology, style guides, or anything else that we need to take into account.
Yeah. See,
I don't know if that answers that question. It's quite a long one.
Yeah, sorry.
No, but it is interesting, and it makes me think from an instructional designer perspective, when I'm going to a client, and whether it's going to need translation services or not, it'd be a good idea for me to say to them, do you have a glossary of terms? Do you have specific industry, phrases or terminology that you're going to want me to use in my design? So that's a definite takeaway that I'm going to have.
Every company has their own, in inverted commas, corporate language.
Yeah.
Do you call a client or a customer?
Mm-hmm.
Do you call a supplier a partner, associate, a supplier?
Yeah.
Everyone has their own corporate language, and it's really important that that's reflected, quite frankly, in everything you do, as you said, even if it's not a translation, but specifically in a translation as well, to make sure it's on patch. And they will always have keywords they use to describe their services, their structure, colleagues, everything. So it is really quite a fundamental part to make sure that that's captured, really. So
Yeah.
And translation, I think for a lot of people, the worry with translation for me is that, I'm not suggesting everyone does, but what we see quite a lot is in a project, it's the piece that gets squeezed. I don't just mean financially, I mean in time. Really important that actually it's factored in at the earliest stage. And going to your comment about when do we get involved, the best thing for us to get involved is at the earliest opportunity. If you think there's an opportunity to put or to pitch to a client that's got international footprint, global footprint, and there's an opportunity for that to be expanded in other languages subject to the content, get us involved at that point. Get us involved at that point to say, okay, what does this look like from a budget perspective? What do I need to be aware of? What are we considering here? What are the risks? And we would go through that with you to help you map that out into your budget and into your proposal, because actually it will add weight and depth and consideration in terms of what you're submitting to your client of actually, well, yeah, someone really understands what we're doing here. So at the earliest point, because then when you're in part of a project plan, if it's a large rollout of a campaign for a development program or a global leadership program, a marketing launch, a product launch, whatever it may be, there's a timeline normally. And it's always best for us to work for the go live back and actually build in resilience, because if it's going to review in company for it to be reviewed in language, I guarantee it'll always take longer than it's scheduled for, because other people have their day job to get on with. And there's always other factors. So it's really important to start planning that in within a project timeline a little bit more than perhaps you think you need to, and build a little bit more resilience than you would. People go sick, people are on holiday, and that's not always factored in when a project timeline is designed. So it's just those normal human things that you just need to build consideration in for to give it a bit of bandwidth. The absolutely earliest opportunity, shout. If you've got a sniff, more than happy to have a look, and be bold, put it out there to test the water. Say to the clients, is this going to be a global program? Love to have the conversation, and we'll help.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing, that you coming in as a partner onto the project, because you're going to have so much more experience dealing with all the foibles of a translation project than me being the instructional designer who's just designing the thing.
Yeah.
And like, going back to my project, I was getting the translations in, and then I was just tweaking the sizing to make everything fit, because one of the languages was German, which then screwed up the size of all the text because it was off the page. Because there's that to consider as well. But I had no idea if it made sense.
Steph and I were discussing this morning, weren't we, Steph? And we said, subject to the languages, if you've got subtitling, it will not, different languages perhaps won't fit within your subtitling space, or your timing on your audio, or, for your voiceovers, or even on your space if you're doing it as a PowerPoint delivery presentation, or, there's a number of considerations just in terms of converting to different languages and the physical text space that it takes, just as one point to consider. So there's a great saying that someone always used to say to me, which is, you don't know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. And that's not a negative or a criticism. Instructional designers, people designing content, amazing. And that's what people are really strong at doing. And then what we're strong at doing is what we do. So we like to work with our clients to have a marriage, to have a blend of those skills to deliver the final package. So we try and work with our clients on a trusted partner base. Steph was involved in a project with the same logistics company, and Steph will be very careful what we say about this one. But there was, again, this large logistics company, and we were involved with our e-learning development partner, directly involved with the end client, because it shortcutted the communication routes, because there was so much going on. So we became part of that virtual team, which is a great position of trust, actually, and actually huge recognition of the value add into those conversations of, well, don't send it to me and I've got to ask the question, because actually that's not my strength. Let's just engage with Steph and the Accenture team at that point, which is what we did. I think there was a huge sigh of relief when that project was finished though, Steph, wasn't it? Because it was a particularly challenging one.
It was, yes. But it was quite successful, so that's always good. But particularly when there's a lot of different parties involved, you have to obviously make sure that everybody's happy at all times, and that can be challenging, as you probably well know yourself, Kim. So it's always trying to balance and to juggle everything, and making sure that what we do is beneficial for everyone. Because what might work for us, or what might be most efficient for us and how we prefer to work, might not be what the client prefers. So you kind of have to, it's a little bit of a give and take, I suppose, and try to find a middle way that works for everybody. And some projects are very straightforward, where that's not a problem. Others, we need to navigate through that. And this was one of those. The project that Leigh referred to was quite a challenging one in that respect, but good learning curve for us as well, because we learn on every project as well. It's not like, even though we've been in the business for a long time, we learn every single time as well. Every new project teaches us something new, so we keep evolving, and that also it makes us what's the word? I'm a Dutch native speaker, so sometimes I have my Dutch hat on, but it we need to be proactive constantly as well. So we can never sit back and relax. And I think that's a good attitude to have.
And a healthy dose of diplomacy.
Yeah.
In all situations.
That too.
So I think Mariam just asked another question. I didn't quite catch it as it came up, but I think was it about control, Mariam, about visibility and control, how you're bringing people together on the project? Sorry, I didn't catch the chat box quickly enough.
It's how do you marry all? First of all, exactly. How do you marry all when there's too many parties involved? So how do you make it all just work?
I would say it's about visibility of the project plans. I think it's about sharing documents openly. And so first of all, you've got to have visibility of the plan. So you know your go live date and responsibilities, and you've all agreed your markers within that. And so we work with clients with access to SharePoint documents, Google Docs, or whatever, you know, if they've got their own system and they want us to access that. It is absolutely about all being able to see that visibility. And that's certainly part of our communication. You know, if anything, we over-inform. We don't wait for people to chase us. We keep people advised the whole time. So Steph is brilliant at being one step ahead of keeping people advised of everything that's going on in progress. So that, you know, that's one thing they haven't got to worry about. They know Steph's going to come back and communicate. But I think if it's an open view document and control documents around that and you've all got access to that, that's a really important part. I think strong brief meetings to start with, to make sure you're all on the same page. I think progress meetings are important, subject to the size of the project. So again, you can all make sure you're on the same page. And if anything has changed, minimize email. If you can, go to open documents, because we all get bombarded with email and then you've got to go through the trails and pick out the details. So it's absolutely about open communication, I would say, in terms of sharing visibility with clear instruction, clear deadline dates, you know, communication points, you know, defined owners of tasks, and sign-off points all the way down along the line, so you all know what you're working to in a really strict project environment. I don't know if Steph's got anything to add to that, but that's certainly what I would say.
No, I think you're spot on, Leigh. The only thing I would like to add is, obviously, because if we work for a client who has a specific end client and we are kind of involved in the meetings with the end client, and we're just a supplier, so we also know our position, and we are respectful of that as well. And obviously all the appropriate NDAs are in place as well, so that there's never a worry about confidentiality, because that's obviously a top priority as well. So it's not, we don't want to step on anybody's toes. We know our position. We're the translation partner of a client, and whether they are the end client or they have an end client or an end client of an end client, then we obviously take that into account as well. And I think that also, and depending on that situation, it's you know, if we just deal with our client is the end client, then obviously we have a bit more liberty to step in, advise, take the lead, than when we're just the partner of a client who's working on a big project for their client, basically. So it depends on the situation, I would say.
So typically, if we're working with one of our trusted learning partners who develop content and they directly introduce us to their final corporate client, that's what you're referring to, Steph, isn't it? That we will tuck in underneath, you know, we will advise, we won't get into contentious situations, we will advise offline if necessary, rather than being in a situation that wouldn't be seen to be upholding our learning partner's advice or whatever. We'd have that conversation with them separately.
Yeah.
Because I suppose that, like, if it was us working together, it's like, well, that's my client, I'm their main contact, and you're coming in, so it's really working the way that you're saying there would stop any confusion from the client's perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And we would work under the guise. So, you know, if your client, you're setting the directive with the client and the project, and we work under your instruction of where you want us to be involved or not, and how you want us to be involved or not. if it's a multi-layered project and and a lot of people involved in it, sometimes it is easier that we're directly involved in that conversation. And that's what Steph is saying. We have NDAs in place and we protect the client. It's interesting, the partner that Steph's referring to, when we started approaching them, I've been in communication with a particular gentleman who engaged us. And actually, one of my points to him was, look, we appreciate you've been involved in a sales cycle that's probably taken in excess of 6 to 9 months to get your client to this point. It's your client. It's not ours. You are our client. We absolutely respect that. And we would do everything to make sure that you are delivered in the best light to that client through this project, because actually it puts us in a point of privilege that someone's trusted us to become involved in that process, considering the investment that it's taken to get that client to the table. And we never forget that, we're part of that chain, and we respect the time, the investment, the cost in the business that's gone into bringing that client to the table. And we take it really seriously in terms of upholding what we say we're going to do when we do it. And that's why we also are so considered in our advice, because we know how long it's taken, and it's someone's livelihood or someone's sales target or their, whatever the case may be, it's direct impact on an individual somewhere in the chain by the time it gets to us. So we really try to do our best advice, conscious of people's time and budgets and everything else, to make sure that we're delivering the best that we of our service. And there are the odd occasion where we go, don't touch it with a barge pole. No, I'm joking. We haven't done that yet, Steph, have we?
No, we never really decline any projects. I think only once we did, and that was not because we didn't want to do it. It was just not possible, and that was a voiceover project, and we needed, I think, 14 different accents, Irish accents, from not even regions, but specific villages. So we tried, and we had to pass it back and say, I'm really sorry, this is not going to happen. But we don't like declining work, so we always make an effort. But that was particularly challenging, and we really didn't know what to do anymore.
To be honest, I don't think they managed to get it supported in the way they wanted it from anybody else either, did they?
No, I don't think so. But it was and it was also quite
sensitive, wasn't it?
Topic. So it was difficult to say no and basically say, I'm sorry, we can't help. But they were very appreciative that we were open, because I think that's also one of the things that we, I think, pride ourselves in, Leigh, transparency. So if something is a problem, if something doesn't work, or we can't do something the way our client wants to, then we will tell them, and we will try to advise them on how we can achieve what they want. And I think we've only had positive experiences or positive responses to that, because clients appreciate it when you're open and honest. You don't have to you don't have to lie if you can't hit a deadline. Just tell them what's wrong. Tell them why you can't hit the deadline, why there is a problem, and it works better. And I think it also makes the relationships that we have with our clients stronger, because they know they can trust us. If there is a problem, we will flag it.
Absolutely.
Not last minute, but we do that in a timely manner as well, so that they can anticipate and maybe reschedule or make a new plan, basically.
See, I'm imagining
that's where that early conversation comes in. Sorry, Kim.
I was just saying, I imagine that you could kit out a camper van with a sound booth and then just do a tour of Ireland, and then go to it. Read this. Here's 15 euros. There you go.
St. Patrick's Day, you could probably got a lot of people in one place at one time, but but that's an interesting point, because voiceover is another topic completely. And that's another topic completely, Steph, isn't it, in terms of the challenges that presents, because, you have a voiceover talent, and then there's a tiny retake that you want to take and adjust, and if that voiceover talent suddenly isn't available because they're on another project
Nightmare.
or
On holiday
on holiday,
or
and it may be a
AWOL.
sentence.
We've had that as well.
It's hugely convoluted in terms of managing voiceover talents. And actually what we're finding is more of the industry is going to text to speech, which is far more developed. And actually, as a society, I think we're more accepting now of that type of voice. We have Alexas and we have our sat navs and we have everything else. So I think the world actually is far more accepting of that. But again, we can also do linguistic reviews after that with, linguists to make sure it's correct and tonal inflection is correct and things of that nature. And actually, TTS, text to speech, does give a hugely beneficial time, cost saving, but certainly time and flexibility, when you want to get something delivered. So if it's a tight time project and you're managing, 4 different languages or 12 different languages, as we see in some of them, then, it really is a serious consideration for people to think about. And we could support them with voiceover samples and things like that as well, that they could choose and refine it. Some languages it doesn't work, Steph, doesn't it? Some it really doesn't work.
There's a couple that are not as good as others. There's a couple that are not as good as others, but they're also constantly evolving. So every month there will be an improvement, and because there's so many different platforms. Some platforms are very good at certain languages, and other platforms are better at delivering other languages. So and we have access to all these platforms, which is great. So we can help wherever we can and provide the best service and the best quality AI voiceovers, if that is what is required.
And sometimes that's half the battle, is it? It's just knowing where to go to get something, and that's I guess where our experience comes in. It's knowing where to go to get the best support if that's what you want to do. Because we've been through it, tried and tested. So happy to share that information.
Thing is, this is your specialty, isn't it? It's not just
absolutely.
like a sideline. It is your specialty. And I've done voiceover myself. I even have my own little sound booth, which is one of those cloth boxes that you get from IKEA or whatever, with some sound deadening inside. And I'd put my microphone in, and I would do the voiceover for usually system demo videos. And like you say, if I need to change the wording in the middle bit, I would try to get it sounding as close as possible, but you can always tell. If it's a high-end project, it's a complete re-record.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you can never get it matching exactly when you're inserting a word. It's like when they change the name of something in a movie, and that actually, case in point, so there's Demolition Man, remember, with Sylvester Stallone? And it was Taco Bell in the original movie, but they changed it to Pizza Hut for the Europe. And you can tell when they say Pizza Hut that it's just been added in.
Yeah. I always find it a bit akin to when someone leaves a voicemail on their on your phone, your voicemail on your phone, and it's someone's name. It's like, Lee is not available, and it just probably it's not that bad when you've got professional voiceovers, but I absolutely get your point. It's quite interesting. I just had visions of you there and Kim sat actually with a packing container with egg cartons inside and a flashlight and your little recorder there.
I mean, to be fair, I don't do my own voiceovers that much anymore. I mean, I do if a client says to me, I want your voice on it, that's fine. I mean, some people do struggle with my Yorkshire accent, especially when I'm, dropping the, and it's just to, so I have to try and strip out my accent if I'm doing my voiceover, which is a whole other issue. So I do use the text to speech, the AI voices. My tool of choice is Colossian at the minute. But I've tried, there's others, there's Synthesia, there's Murph, there's quite a few out there nowadays. And with some of them, you can hardly tell.
They're very close. They're very good. It really does, I think, go back to the tone that you want to deliver. And even again, if you're thinking male, female, formal, informal, and thinking of the target audience, and again, emotive content. If it's emotive content, you've really got to get that balance right. Really got to get that balance right. I think Marion put up, I think it was challenges and
delays.
Yeah, challenges and delays. So are we talking translation in general or voiceovers there? Do we think Mariam, I don't know which one you're thinking of specifically. What would you suggest are the biggest challenges, Steph, in terms of translation, do you think?
Managing expectations.
Managing expectations, yeah.
Particularly when it's a new client, I think we have
Who doesn't know what it takes. You mean?
Yeah, no, because I also think if you have a new client who doesn't really know anything about translation and they just think, oh, it's a click of a button and that's it, then obviously you tell them, well, we wish, but that's not how it works. It's about educating people and explaining to them what the processes are. So that's what we do. Usually also with new clients, we have a meeting to kick off the project, but also maybe to give an introduction as to what we work, how we work, and what we do, and then take it from there. But I think, managing expectations, or they say, "Oh, I have this. Can you send it to me tomorrow?" No, it's 5,000 words, and you want human translation. It's not possible. We have some superhuman legal translators in our books, but they mainly work for the Dutch clientele, which very much targets the Dutch legal market. And because of the terminology and the language, the legal, the nature of legal text, they're all kind of structured in the same way, worded in the same way. They can do 10,000 words a day, some of them, but that is superhuman. And the demands in that particular industry are also quite different. Where we work, the learning and development industry is slightly different. So we try to kind of temper their expectations by saying, well, we can't do it tomorrow, but maybe we could do it, say, end of the week. So you always try to negotiate. We never say no. We try to come up with a solution, because I think that's how you work out a way forward. So it's because otherwise you kind of put a blocker in the road and then that's it. And you don't really want to close the door either. And then in terms of delays, that can be challenging as well. Sometimes projects are delayed.
You mean from the client side on delivery to us, Steph, in terms of content, rather than us delaying a translation? It's typically we get a delay from a client, isn't it, in terms of...
Well, yes, but also sometimes we do, due to unforeseen circumstances. For example, the translator falls sick, and they're in the middle of translating, so they have to give it back. So we have to find someone else to do it, and then obviously the reviewer will have to also review it, because we always have it translated and reviewed. So there's always two people involved. And then obviously we have to go back to the client and say, we're really sorry, this has happened. We need an extra day, for example. We also...
Sorry, that's quite an extreme case though, isn't it? I mean, we're really painting sort of worst case scenarios here.
Yeah, but it has happened.
Yeah.
But
humans,
I agree with you that most delays are because the client is pushing back, or because most of our clients or their end clients want to review. And it's usually those reviews, and Leigh already briefly mentioned it, it takes longer than expected. So people have to do it in their own time, on top of in addition to their full-time jobs. And that can take a lot of time, particularly if it's, 20,000 words. And on average, professional reviewers review about 2,000 words per hour. So that would mean for a text of 20,000 words, that's 10 hours. If you, as a non-linguist, have to review a text because your boss tells you to, then obviously, and you've never really done that before, it's going to take you a long time, I think. So usually clients come back and say, oh, we need, there's been a change to the project plan. It's all been pushed back because we need longer on the review. And then where I think, Leigh, correct me if I'm wrong, but those delays are usually, they don't really have an impact on us. It's more as an FYI, okay, we'll be ready when the review feedback comes in, and we'll jump on it because we implement those changes and then release the updated files to the client. So for us, it doesn't really make a huge difference, but obviously the sooner we know about the delay, the better. And if there's a delay on our side, we also prefer to obviously advise the client of this as early as we can, so that because usually the timelines on their side are impacted as well. If they have to do a review, or if they need to forward it to the client, to their end client, who is waiting for it to come into review, then they need to be made aware that it's not coming in when it was promised for. So, but they're all very negotiable in my experience. And sometimes it is what it is. It's just out of your control and there's nothing you can do about it. So the best thing is to find a way forward and deliver as soon as we can.
I think to summarise it, it goes back to the comment, people don't know what they don't know. And I think it's at the end client level, the final corporate level, because someone in that process, if they're not familiar with translation, they don't understand it. So I think what we always try and do is educate, isn't it, through that process, that if you do this, the impacts are X. So to mitigate that impact, we need to do X, Y, and Z, and these are your options. So it's about clear communication, isn't it, in managing challenges, because delays can come in from any type of side, but it's like anything. If you talk it through, you know what the deadlines are, you know what you're trying to work to, and you try and mitigate those risks as much as possible in the beginning, you're prepared for it. So everyone knows what they're working to. You may get a curveball come in, that's life, but generally, if you can have that open conversation to start with, understand the project and the timelines and the critical the KPIs within that, then typically you can work through it. So unless there's paper short, God forbid, and that's a whole different conversation. We don't want to go there again.
Thing is, you could get delays in any project.
Yeah, completely.
I had a client couple of years ago, and I was doing 2 gigs at the same time because they weren't clashing. In my infinite wisdom, I was like, yeah, it's fine. Deadlines will be different. No, one of them pushed back a week on the sign-off because they needed more time for sign-off. And then it ended up that I had 2 delivery deadlines on the same day. And when I'm designing stuff, yes, I can jump between different projects, but that week it was hellish because I had these 2 different clients, completely different training material. So it wasn't even similar. It was completely different. Both of them managed to get it out. And that's the main thing, that you hit the deadlines, as much as possible. And your clients are going to remember that you always deliver. If there's a delay, you let them know, you get them involved in the conversation. You don't try and think, well, actually, let's just wing it. You keep that conversation going.
The thing that most people forget about translation is that it is a bit of a movable feast. And by that, I mean, it is very subjective to the people involved in the trail. So, right the way through from whoever's designing the content, delivering on time, for that being signed off by the company, contracted by, everyone being happy with that content, then agreeing that, the style that they want to take forward, then getting it into delivery. It's a very subjective, humanly emotive topic, translation. And you know, it isn't as Steph just said, pressing a button. Oh yeah, you can do that overnight. It is. There's a lot more behind it than that. I think if I was going to just, you know, watching some of the stuff that Steph gets involved in, if I had one observation, it would be, don't expect that the client has checked everything they've sent you, and don't expect that they've sent you the right files, or they've double checked their files, or, you know, they've sent you the latest version, or they've got their own correct file control, because we see it all the time with very experienced project managers sending us files. You know, there are pieces of text missing where they've copied it between different languages. We've had one this morning, exactly that. There are files missing when they've sent you a batch of files. Or they've sent you the wrong version of the file rather than it being the last edited version of the file. So I think if there is a challenge, it is absolutely about not expecting everything to be as it should be. And then, you know, we always check that. Absolutely. You know, if whoever's involved in the project, would really be a good idea for them to check it before, because we would ask for definitive files. Because it's so subjective, we would have to go back and say, actually, that's the definitive file. That's the ones you sent us. You know, we asked you to sign that off. You know, that's the ones we've translated. If there's a problem, I'm really, you know, while we'll try and help you, you have to realise that's the ones you gave us. You know, so it's that attention to detail is never assumed that it's been checked.
But I suppose if you've already given that out to your translators or your voiceover artists, they've already started work. They need paying for essentially the wrong material.
Yeah.
So in that kind of situation, would you go back to the client and say, well, you gave us the wrong thing. Okay, so we're out £3,000, let's say, for an example. That's going to be added onto the bill.
Yeah. Yeah, we'd go back and have that conversation with them. I mean, to be fair, Kim, we'd look at it in the context of the project and look at what it was. And if it's something that could be adjusted, I mean, there's one this morning that there's more adjustments that have come back because actually they missed text completely versus ones they wanted to correct that they hadn't checked. And within that scope, we can cover that because it's the same cost to get the person online to do it. So it really depends on what it is. But we would always go back and say, this is what you've asked us to deliver. This is what we've checked with you. This is what we've delivered. If that's incorrect and we've ratified all of that, then here's the evidence of that. And actually, if it now needs to be something else, this is going to be the cost. And then we would support you in that conversation going back to the client. Because if the boot was on the other foot and, you know, it was a client selling a service to a customer, and they had more time involved in that customer, you know, if it was an engineering company or a legal company or whatever, and they were selling to a service to a client that had shown, they would be charging that client. So it used to make us chuckle in some of the legal side. I mean, sometimes we'd get a query back on grammar or a language because, you know, we do it correctly, but someone, again, it's subjective. Someone will always query it. And literally someone would haggle over like 15 euro cents. And actually they were charging these clients out at 250 euros an hour. You know, can we get this context, guys, you know, for what you're doing here? So it's really interesting how people behave in that situation. But our recommendation is check, make sure what you've got is absolutely the final files, and actually have a good file structure with your clients. Make sure it's all been signed off and you can evidence that they've signed that off. And then you send it to us. So you're protecting your back all the way through the line. And I don't mean that from a negative sense. It's just good discipline and practice.
Yes.
Robust process to make sure that that's what happens.
And it stops scope creep, which is the worst thing that any business owner, it's like the dreaded thing, the scope creep, isn't it?
Absolutely. And interpretation of, and we will ask for scope of work and that full brief, because then if it's documented, it's there. You know, so people's interpretation of what the written word is even. So that's again why we have the briefing conversation and everything else. It's absolutely about bolting it down so costs don't run away and people know exactly what they're getting for the delivery.
Do you put a contingency funding? Because I've done that on a few clients where I'm like, okay, so this is the price, but we've got like a 10% contingency. If there's scope creep, if there's additional requirements that we can dip into and it's all agreed at the outset.
It's interesting. I mean, I don't recall us doing that from a translation perspective because people view translation as a commoditized service, and it's not. the place to put that creep in is actually in the design and build. So again, if we're working with you and we say, look, there might be some creep here, you factor that in at the front end of your project scope creep. So there's a bit of space there if it happened. But unfortunately, people do think that translation is a commodity, because a lot of people, still price per word. We still price per word. So it is a perception around it. It's better to put it at that front end in the overall project piece. And to be fair, with our clients, we do charge project management time, because the work that Steph and the project managers do isn't just taking a file and sending it to a translator. There's a huge amount of prep work and checking, QA checks, everything, and the communication back and forth and being involved in those conversations takes time. All takes time. And most clients that we deal with in the L&D space recognise the value of a PM in that process and the QA controls that go on around it, and are happy to pay for project management time, because actually they charge their project managers onto their clients. So they get that as part of the concept. Some industries don't, but we found that L&D do, and they absolutely get the value of that part of the contribution in the process.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, I could literally chat to you about this for hours, because I've still got questions. One of them about idioms. When I was on it, it was a very, very technical project. And the main thing was, do not use English idioms. Stay away from localized words. And because it was going to be translated into a Middle Eastern language. So it was like, it wasn't just changing the words, it was changing the direction of text and all of that. And they were like, just keep it short and simple.
I think that's, again, we're looking at text we looked at this morning, which was for a Japanese client. And I actually found the English quite abrupt in terms of what they put together, but it was for exactly that point. I think it was about keeping it really, really simple, so it wasn't open to interpretation. It was very factual information, and it was being translated into, was it 4 other languages, Steph, this morning?
4 languages, yeah. And I think the reason why it was abrupt as well is that everything was recorded, so the entire course was audio. So usually what we see is that only part of the course is audio, but this one was complete, like from start to finish. So what you see on the slides is literally what you hear as well, and the subtitles as well. And I think for that reason, they had to make it quite short and abrupt and to the point, really.
But again, very simple with a non-localization, and there's a challenge there, because depending what you're translating, actually you may want to localize it with local slang.
Yes.
So it's really, again, going back to the point. Yeah, absolutely. So it's going back to knowing the point of your target audience, what it is that you're trying to deliver. Again, if it's an Asia, community, it's absolutely understanding that cultural difference through the hierarchical structure of the business and things like that. So there's lots of things really that need to be considered, and there's some cases where localization really works, in terms of a slang or from the back of an idiom, and others where it just doesn't. So it's knowing the brief for the project. That's the challenge.
And that is a perfect place to stop. So thank you so much for joining us this month. That has been absolutely fascinating.